Hey everyone, Luke from SafetyWise, and I'm here today with Jodi Woelkerling. You may recall probably about 2 months ago, Jodi wrote an article for SafetyWise. It was around managing stress in the occupational health and safety industry. So for myself, I've got a background in emergency services, had a lot of exposure with things like post-traumatic stress and obviously seeing stress and how it affects people. So it's obviously been a bit of a passion for mine. And I hooked up with Jodi, and we've had a number of conversations on the topic, and I invited Jodi to write the article for us. And again, I'll post a link to the article with this video as well. Jodi, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
No problem. And obviously thank you for writing the article. I think it's fair to say that it's had a pretty incredible reception.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we've both been a bit surprised, sort of the take up of that article. Clearly, it's a topic that's close to people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, tell me what's your thoughts? Where's your head at? Well, I know certainly when we were talking about writing it, we were both a bit unsure how it would be received. 2 months down the track, where you at?
Yep. It's been quite, as you said, a large response, and the number of people who've gone, yes, this is a major issue out there with stress. And obviously with the article, there was a particular focus on the safety professionals are the people who are responsible for looking after other people's safety, but who's actually looking after them?
Who cares for the carers?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's great to see that there has been that sort of attention out there, because people realise how big an issue this is and how much it really does need focus and attention.
Why do you think it's seen as such a big issue? What's the shift that's happened?
I think people are realising that mental health is definitely a major priority, and people are seeing the effect of things like stress or trauma on people's lives and how they operate in the world. And it's also part of that whole, yes, there's the workplace and how things work in the workplace, but people are also realising, okay, well, what happens in the workplace also has a huge effect outside of work.
For sure. And your article, and I know we've had a number of conversations just between you and I, we've spoken about that. You know, what you wrote about is actually not just for the safety industry. I mean, it's for every industry. I mean, I know you've got a background in finance and banking, which is known worldwide as a high stress industry. It's just as relevant there as it is to us. It just happens we ask you to write it and we put that slant on it. But yeah. What's your thoughts? And I'll come back to my thoughts in a minute. What's your thoughts on things like the Are You OK days? You know, has that been a good thing? I think it's had mixed receptions with people. What's your thoughts?
The upside is that it raises awareness. So things like Are You OK and Beyond Blue and that sort of stuff, it raises awareness, and people don't think about what's not in their normal everyday frame of reference. So that's the good side of it. As to whether it's actually getting to the root cause and actually making a difference, who knows? That's
the concern I've had. I have expressed this a number of times to people and on social media as well. You know, I like these sort of concepts and these programs and these campaigns. I think they're good. I think particularly this conversation is not a conversation for one day. You know, this is a conversation for
100%,
365 days a year, 24/7.
Yep.
These are conversations we should be having, and that's what concerns me. We see a lot of organisations and people get behind Are You OK, and I think it's great, as you said, for raising the awareness and the profile. But what concerns me is what happens a day later, a week later, a month later, a year later.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's what people need to be aware of. I think on the flip side, I mean, the response we've had to this article, as we said, has blown both of us away. So I think certainly amongst the safety industry, people are seeing it going, it's a problem. We need to do something. Yeah, no doubt about it. The articles, you spoke about a number of things. So stress, you know, how does it manifest? What's it look like? And obviously it's different for everyone, but what are some of the common signs and symptoms?
Okay. So you've kind of got different levels of it. So in the more, I hesitate to say extreme, but in the sort of the more serious version, you can get things like post-traumatic stress disorder. Often that is triggered by a traumatic event, which does happen particularly in some of those high risk jobs, like police officers, military, that sort of stuff. And how that manifests, it does vary depending on the individual, but it's things like hypervigilance and being on edge and just making their everyday functioning difficult. They can get triggered by things that remind them of whatever the trauma source was originally. So that's sort of the post-traumatic stress disorder. The other thing that's becoming a lot more common these days is burnout. So that's where people go through prolonged periods of stress, and they become, it's labelled psychological emotional burnout, where they pretty much get to emotional exhaustion. And the really serious side of burnout is that statistically most people find it easier to walk away from their career and walk away from their job when they reach that burnout stage.
Instead of doing something about it and addressing it. It's interesting.
Absolutely.
Is that because people don't want to talk about it?
That's part of it. Definitely part of it.
And we see that. I mean, there's a number of industries out there that are renowned. You know, it's a blokey thing. You can't talk about stress and can't talk about emotions. How dare you? We're tough. We don't do that. And we do. And we should.
And there's an element there of self-denial in it as well.
Or self-preservation.
So the more run-of-the-mill everyday version you see is just your everyday stress, where people feel on edge, they don't feel safe and secure in their job. They're a lot less likely to speak up when they see issues. So that's a big issue in itself, because it has very large implications for things like absenteeism, presenteeism, where somebody's physically there but they're not actually doing their job, or not doing it to the best of their ability. Things like people not really looking for innovation and development in their work. So the organisation, that's kind of an indirect cost to the organisation that's very hard to quantify.
I just want to jump back to the hypervigilance for a second. I read a research study a number of years ago now from an ambulance service, and they were studying stress and the effects. And the way they operated was they have their portable radios on 24/7. The radio will kick in, like turn on, they'll get a tone, and then the person would talk, you know, go to this job, do this, do that. And what they actually found is they had this hypervigilance amongst paramedics, and what they discovered was the thermostat in the fridges would kick in, kick out, and the click noise that it made was the same noise as the radio. So they'll be asleep, might be in the lounge room or watching telly or making dinner, whatever it may be. Click goes the thermostat, and they were reacting to it and waiting for the radio to go, and it wasn't. You know, it's quite interesting that sort of thing happens, and probably subconsciously, not even realizing they're doing it.
And it can have huge effects on somebody's life.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back to the article. So in it, you also spoke, there was both from a personal perspective, but also from an employer perspective. Let's talk from a personal level. What are some of the things that people can do to help?
Okay, so I've kind of, in the article, categorised this into two categories. So there's the self-care practices, and these are the things that people know that they should be doing, that most people get a little bit lax on. So things like getting enough sleep, things like making sure they're eating a healthy diet, things like allowing for time for rest and relaxation, social connections, barriers, I call it barriers of time and space. So that's things like work is work, home is home, and you don't have things like, if possible, unless you're on call, things like the phone basically beeping with your work emails at 10 o'clock at night.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that in its own right is a whole conversation to have on its own, because we're all connected now, 24/7. It's ingrained into us. You know, you go to a job, here's your iPhone or your whatever it may be, here's your smartphone. You've got access to your emails, you've got access to your social media, you've got access to everything. And do you actually switch off? In a lot of cases, no. Yeah, absolutely. That's an interesting one. And people talk about work-life balance, but I think for as long as you've got that thing in your hand and it's work-related that you're doing, they're actually no balance.
I was in a role in the past where I would have customers contacting me in the middle of a Sunday afternoon or at 10 o'clock at night, and I ended up basically getting to the point where I would leave work on a Friday night, the phone would get turned off, didn't have any electronic access, and didn't get turned on until Monday morning. Otherwise, I didn't have that situation where I was mentally switching off, which everybody needs.
I think it's an interesting discussion because it's seen as a good thing to be connected and to be available and have access. There's instant access, but conversely, there's consequences for that, which manifest in, as you say. So from a self-help, what are some of the things we can be doing? What else can we do?
Okay, so that's the self-care stuff. So basically things that people mostly know about already. So looking after yourself. And it can make a huge difference. So things like getting enough sleep has a huge effect on people's
And we've had our conversations about sleep. Absolutely. I've shared videos about sleep, for sure. Sleep apnea.
Me too.
Absolutely. I know we've spoken about it, and you don't appreciate good sleep until you actually get it and go, that's what it feels like. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely. And that applies to so many other areas of life as well. Getting out and going for a walk for half an hour every day can make an enormous difference. So that's the self-care side. And then there's the self-management side. So that's about really being aware of yourself. So mindfulness is part of that. Actually being aware, okay, am I holding stress? Am I holding tension? How am I reacting to this situation? So being very self-aware. So that's definitely part of it. And things like managing yourself so that if you do see signs that there's stress there, doing something about it rather than ignoring the warning signs. So things like reach out for help. Most of the large organisations these days have EAP, employee assistance programs. Reach out to them or other professionals, talk to a colleague. So the speak up, also having an idea of the big picture of why you're doing what you're doing as well, can make an enormous difference. It's very easy to get kind of bogged down in the everyday of, I have to go and do this again. But if you have in the back of your mind, what's my big picture reason personally and also organisationally, what am I actually doing and why am I doing this? So there's quite a lot of self-management things that can make an enormous difference.
It's interesting because over the years I've had a number of conversations with people just about careers and career change, and I've never really looked at it from a stress perspective, but I've had a number of conversations with people that it's just a drag. I find it hard to get up in the morning and I'm just not motivated to do my job. And I think there it is. It's right there in front of you.
That's a red alert.
Yeah, it's telling you there's a problem. You've got to make some changes. If that's a career change, then so be it. Or as you said, it might be a lifestyle change or whatever it may be. But people don't see it as that. Oh, I hate my job. Oh. And I know it's easy to say do something about it, but as you said, there is simple things that you do. It might be a diet, it might be sleep, it might be some exercise, and you might actually find it's not the job itself. It's other factors.
Absolutely.
And I don't know that people recognise that. You spoke an article from an employer perspective. That's big, and especially for a company like SafetyWise, a big part of our investigations looks at organisations and how they contribute to incidents, culture, stuff like that.
Absolutely.
What about employers?
So employers have a duty of care to foster certain environments that minimise stress wherever possible, and then when it happens, to actually have mechanisms for dealing with it and helping the people who are affected. So in terms of things that they can put in place to reduce stress, one of the basic things is things like adequate resourcing. Make sure that you've got enough people to do the job, so people are under enormous stress. Make sure the people who are doing the job have actually got the equipment, the training, the knowledge to be able to do it. And if they're not at that stage, that they have access to help, whether that's in a person, whether that's a guide, whether that's whatever. So resourcing is not just people, it's also all of the sundry stuff. So resourcing is a huge issue.
I think back to the investigations we do, and I reckon I could just about tick, just about everything you've said there. In just about every incident, there's a resource issue, there's a training issue, there's a, whatever it may be, they're all there.
100%. And from what I've seen out there, especially not having enough people to do a job is one of the biggest causes of stress out there. So moving on from resourcing, other things are things like fostering a speak up culture, where people actually feel that they can speak up when they see an issue without fear of that going personally negatively against themselves.
And I certainly know from my background with emergency services, that's been a big culture. You know, if you speak up, it's a sign of weakness. You know, it could hinder you for a promotion.
Absolutely.
That sort of say. How do we? We'll obviously come back to the organisation section. Let's talk about that. How do you break that, or how can an organisation work on that, where it's not seen as a bad thing to speak up and to raise concerns and questions and seek assistance?
Yep, very big question. I don't think it's something, especially in the larger organisation, that changes in 5 minutes. It takes a very clear communication from the top level of management and communicated down, and where things like people can give feedback anonymously, where things like managers are trained to encourage speaking up. It is a very it's a difficult question to answer, because it's very much specific on what's the culture in that organisation, and it's also, the larger the organisation, the harder that is to shift. But it very much needs to be a top-down change.
That's very cool.
Very much so.
Absolutely.
It's one thing for your everyday manager who might have half a dozen people answering to them, instilling that culture, but that's very limited if it's just that one manager doing it.
Absolutely.
It needs to be an organisation.
And I think that's relevant to any change program, not just a stress thing or you know, that type of mental health program. Anything, you know, it's got to. There's top down, there's bottom up. You know, there's pros and cons of both. Obviously, they both have their place, but yeah, absolutely, it's when it's a lonely voice or that single voice, you're almost doomed. I think you're almost set up to fail. If you don't have that whole buy-in.
The other thing that goes with that speak up culture too is also an open door policy, where any manager, no matter who they are, is available for employees to reach out. And obviously, the bigger the company, the harder that is to do. But what you'll find in a lot of large organisations is, if you got on the email as an internal person and emailed the CEO, you should be able to actually contact them.
Yeah, for sure.
So that open door policy. And again, from both your immediate manager point of view and up the chain to the CEO. The other thing too with organisations too is things like, I talked about purpose from a personal point of view. It's also really important from an organisational point of view. Anybody who's a Simon Sinek fan would be familiar with the why concept. If your staff know the bigger why of what you're doing, rather than, okay, I'm an invoice clerk and all I do all day is write invoices. That can be very dreary after a while. Whereas if that person writing the invoices go, okay, we're an organisation that has the greater purpose of X, Y, Z. I am a cog in the wheel towards that. What I'm doing is
it's interesting. I've challenged a few people. I think wrongly, a lot of people have challenged that thinking as a millennial thing, you know, about working for an organisation with a purpose and all that. The reality is, whether it's you, me, or anyone else, people want to work, regardless of where you are in the food chain, your age, your position in your career. You want to work for a company with a purpose and understand what that purpose is. You know, what is the big picture? What am I contributing to? How does what I do impact on the business?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's an interesting, as I said, I think wrongly labelled as a millennial thing. It's so not. I think it goes back to that conversation I said earlier, you know, where you're waking up in the morning, I don't want to go to work. So
there's the personal big picture and personal purpose, but also the organisational purpose of what you're actually doing.
For sure. Anything else from either an individual or an organisation perspective?
Organisations. So I've talked organisations so far about reducing the stress as much as possible. The flip side of that is, okay, if somebody is affected by stress and is having issues, what are those programs and processes that are in place in order to assist that individual? So that's the other side of it. So things like, I mentioned employee assistance programs earlier, things like access to counsellors, things like allowing people to take some mental health break if they need to, without the the stigma that can be attached to that, and adjusting people's positions if for some reason they need to. So that's the other side of it. If it does actually happen, having the organisations actually conducting with a duty of care around how they look after their individual employees.
Yeah, for sure.
Nobody wants to go to work and do a bad job. So
no, that's right.
They need to help people.
We say the same with their investigations. We don't wake in the morning and go, I'm going to amputate a finger today. I'm going to kill myself today at work. It doesn't happen.
Yep.
All the time it doesn't happen. Yeah.
Tom.
Yeah. All right, bad choice of words. Yeah. But yeah, it's no different though, is it? Yeah, for sure. Again, I think, as I said at the start, we've both acknowledged I think it's highlighted a significant need in the industry. Now, clearly, clearly it is a conversation that people are having, or they want to have and don't know how to have, and are seeking assistance. You know, I think it's been quite an enlightening process to go through that. You know, and I must admit, even for myself as the CEO, you know, we do investigations. You know, mental health is not our thing, and it's not something that we specialise in or get involved in. So I won't lie, I was a little bit dubious and a bit hesitant about even engaging you to do the article, but I actually think it's great, because I think it's just raised some good questions and some good discussions. And yeah, certainly when I shared the article across many of the groups on LinkedIn, you know, it was just constantly pinging with people.
Yep. I'm still, and it was published I think on the 30th of September, and I'm still getting messages coming up around comments around it. Yep. Yeah,
it's an eye-opener, isn't it? Look, I appreciate that. Thank you for your time. Again, thank you for the article, and obviously I think raising and putting a voice, I guess, and putting some pen to paper on a really important topic. And I go back to that phrase I said at the start, you know, we need to be doing more to care for the carers. We've got to be doing that. You know, we see there's a lot of media at the moment around emergency services, paramedics, firefighters and police and so forth, but you know, it's obviously just as relevant. You know, this, as I said, was about the health and safety industry, and clearly,
absolutely,
it's relevant, no doubt about it. Yeah, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
No worries. Hope you enjoyed that. As I said, I will post a link to the article again along with this video. By all means, take the time to read it. It is a long article, but I think Jodi's given some really good insight into the issues and some of the things that we could be doing to address that and making it better for both ourselves and our employees. Thanks for your time.